Monks aren't repeating scriptures because they forgot them. They repeat them because repetition rewires the brain in ways modern students never experience. College students read something once, maybe twice, highlight a few sentences, then forget everything a week later. Monks will repeat the same paragraph for 10 years. And by the end, they don't just remember the text. They become it. The strange part? Cognitive science now shows that the monk method might be the most powerful learning system ever discovered. And it works terrifyingly well. 3 mechanisms. 3 advantages monks discovered centuries before neuroscience existed. And once you understand them, you will never study the same way again. Chapter 1. The illusion of understanding. Most people think reading something many times helps them learn. Wrong. Reading again creates a dangerous mental trick. Recognition. When you reread a sentence, your brain says, "Oh yeah, I remember that." But remembering a sentence is not the same as understanding it. Psychologists call this the illusion of competence. You recognize the words, but you cannot reproduce the idea. Researchers behind the book Make It Stick demonstrated this repeatedly. Students who reread material feel confident, but perform terribly on tests. Why? Because rereading is passive. It feels productive, but nothing is happening. It's like looking at the gym instead of lifting weights. Monks figured this out centuries ago, which is why they don't just read texts. They recite them out loud, from memory, every single day. In Zen monasteries, monks chant sutras hundreds of times. At first they read, then they repeat, then they close the book. Now comes the real work, memory retrieval. Your brain hates retrieval, because retrieval is effort. You struggle, you hesitate, you forget. But that struggle is exactly what creates learning. Psychologist Robert Bjork calls this desirable difficulty. When your brain struggles to recall something, it marks that information as important. It encodes it deeper. Think about the difference. Reading a sentence 10 times versus trying to recall it once from memory. The second one feels harder, but it works far better. Studies show retrieval practice dramatically increases retention. Students who test themselves remember far more than those who simply reread. And monks unknowingly built their entire learning system around retrieval, not review. Which is why repeating a text every day for years isn't pointless. It's neurological training. But here's the problem though. Repetition alone isn't enough. If you repeat something mindlessly, your brain eventually tunes it out, like background noise, which leads to the second advantage monks discovered. Chapter 2. Depth through constraint. You live in a world of infinite information, unlimited books, unlimited videos, unlimited courses, and ironically, you learn nothing because abundance destroys focus. You skim, you jump, you scroll. Your brain never commits. Monks have the opposite environment, scarcity. In many monasteries, monks study only a handful of texts for years, sometimes just 3 or 4 scriptures. That's it, no internet, no libraries of endless information. Just a few texts and endless time. Scarcity forces depth. When you only have one book, you stop skimming. You analyze, you question, you reinterpret. You notice things you missed before. Then something strange happens. The meaning of the text begins to change, not because the text changed, because you changed. When a monk repeats a scripture after 1 year, he hears something different. After 5 years, something deeper. After 10 years, something completely new. The words are identical, but the mind reading them is different. This is called layered comprehension. Every repetition reveals another level. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote that great texts must be ruminated, like a cow chewing food slowly, over and over, because the human brain understands complexity through repeated exposure. Psychologist Anders Ericsson discovered something similar studying experts. Mastery is not built by covering many topics. It is built by going extremely deep into a few. This is deliberate practice, focus, refinement, iteration. The monk system forces this. When you repeat the same text for years, every word becomes a puzzle. Every sentence becomes a doorway. Eventually, the text stops being information. It becomes structure, mental architecture. You no longer remember the words. You think through them. But here's the thing, though. Depth alone doesn't guarantee memory. You can understand something deeply and still forget it, which is why monks unknowingly rely on the third mechanism. And this one might be the most powerful of all. Chapter 3. Spaced repetition. In 1885, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus discovered something disturbing. Your brain forgets almost everything. Within 1 day, you lose a huge portion of what you learned. Within a week, most of it is gone. This pattern became known as the forgetting curve. Your memory is a leaky bucket. Information constantly drips out. But Ebbinghaus discovered something else. You can interrupt the forgetting curve. If you review information at specific intervals, right before forgetting, memory strengthens dramatically. This is called spaced repetition. Modern medical students use software like Anki to apply this principle. Flashcards appear exactly when your brain is about to forget them. But monks were doing this centuries ago, without computers, without algorithms, through ritual, daily chanting, weekly recitation, seasonal retreats, annual repetition cycles. Every time a monk repeats a scripture months or years later, the brain retrieves it again. Just as it begins to fade, the memory strengthens, neural pathways thicken. Eventually, the text becomes permanent. Not temporary, psychologists call this overlearning, the point where information becomes automatic. Musicians experience this, athletes experience this, and monks experience it with language and philosophy. They repeat text so often that recall becomes effortless. The knowledge becomes part of their thinking, not something they must search for. But here's something even more interesting. Repetition doesn't just strengthen memory, it transforms meaning, which leads to the final layer of the monk system. Chapter 4, Identity and Coding. Most students study information. Monks absorb identity. Let me explain. When you read something once, it stays external. A fact, an idea, a sentence in a book. But when you repeat something for years, the line between the text and the reader begins to disappear. The words become internal dialogue. This is why monks memorize entire scriptures. Not because memorization itself is impressive, because repetition rewires how they think. The Buddhist Dhammapada, the Tao Te Ching, the Heart Sutra. Monks repeat these texts thousands of times. Eventually, they no longer recall the words. The words recall them. The teachings begin to guide perception automatically. Modern neuroscience calls this neural patterning. Repeated ideas shape the brain's default pathways. Your thoughts begin following the same structures repeatedly activated, which means monks are not simply memorizing philosophy. They are installing it. Over years of repetition, ethical teachings become reflexes, mental habits, cognitive frameworks. This is the deepest form of learning. And ironically, modern education almost never reaches it. Schools optimize for short-term recall. Exams, grades, deadlines, memorize it today. Forget it tomorrow. Monastic learning optimizes for permanence. A monk might study one teaching for 10 years, but when he learns it, he never forgets it. And here is the irony. The world believes monks are slow learners, but they might be the deepest learners in history. Which brings us to a question. If this system works so well, why doesn't modern education use it? Simple. Speed. Schools are built for scale. One teacher, 30 students, limited time, curriculum deadlines. You cannot spend 3 years repeating one text. Institutions must move fast, which means they sacrifice depth. But individuals don't have that limitation. You can apply the monk method yourself. 3 simple rules. First, choose fewer sources. Most people try to learn from 20 books. Pick 2 or 3. Depth beats volume. Second, replace rereading with recitation. Close the book. Explain the idea out loud. If you cannot explain it, you do not understand it. Third, return to ideas repeatedly over time. Days, weeks, months, not cramming, spacing. This is how memory becomes permanent. And here's the strange part. Once you start doing this, learning begins to feel different. Slower at first, but much deeper. Ideas stick. Connections appear. Concepts evolve. You stop chasing new information and start extracting value from what you already know, which is exactly how monks study. But here's the problem though. Even if you master repetition, even if you master spaced learning, there is still one thing that destroys most people's ability to focus long enough to use it. Distraction. Your phone, your notifications, your endless dopamine feed. Monks don't have that problem. Their environment eliminates it. Which is why some people today are recreating something surprisingly similar to monastic learning. Dopamine detox, deep work environments, distraction-free study systems. And when people combine those with the repetition principles monks discovered centuries ago, learning speed explodes. That's why I made this video breaking down how elite performers train deep focus and eliminate distractions completely. Because if your brain is constantly distracted, even the best learning system in the world won't work. Watch that next.